Daniel McCrae was halfway through his fourth glass of whiskey when the encrypted file pinged his terminal. No subject, no sender, just a blinking icon pulsing like a dying star on his dusty holoscreen. It wasn't the first classified anomaly to drift through the back channels of the Terran archive, but it was the first time his retinal scan alone unlocked something this wrong. The footage didn't buffer. It stabbed into existence, raw and grainy, like a fever dream broadcast from a place where truth had been buried alive. There was no timestamp, only the name of the ship, Mercy Dawn, a medical vessel operating under full non-combatant status, its hull painted in radiant white, a red cross seared into her plating like a plea for mercy no one would dare deny, until someone did. But that's not what hit first. What hit first was the scream. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even human. It sounded like a child drowning in static, saying something no language could hold, and yet Daniel understood it, felt it deep in that part of the brain that remembers dreams before they fade. The scream was cut off by a flash, and then silence so absolute it rang in his bones. That's when the gut punch landed. In the chaos, the image froze, and there, standing on the bridge of the enemy vessel, barely visible in the emergency light, was a woman Daniel had buried 9 years ago, his sister, Elise, and she was looking straight into the camera, straight at him. I know what you're thinking. It's just a glitch, a deep fake, a file corruption layered by some lunatic with access to war archives. That's what I told myself too, until 2 days later, when the Andersons' baby, 6 months old, barely babbling, looked directly at Daniel during a visit and said in perfect clarity, "Don't trust the silence. Please lied." The baby went limp after that, coma-like. No brain activity, no medical cause. The parents moved off-world without a word, leaving everything behind. I checked the footage. The audio doesn't exist. Only I heard it. Only I saw the message Elise left behind in the ship's last transmission, encoded in an obsolete Terran dialect no one's used in decades. They knew. They wanted it. This wasn't just an attack. This wasn't war. This was permission. The fleet we sent in response, God help us. It wasn't vengeance, it was prophecy. And if what I'm about to show you is real, then we're not fighting a war anymore. We're fulfilling something written in the dark long before we ever built ships to find the stars. And now, he's missing. Colonel Grant. The one man who survived the retaliation, vanished last night. No distress beacon, no hull breach, nothing on the scans. Just one note carved into the inside of his sleep pod. She's not in the grave anymore. She's waiting in the light. And the worst part, we can't remember if he was ever on board. Daniel didn't sleep that night. Not because he didn't try, but because every time he closed his eyes, he woke up somewhere else. Once he was at the bridge, alone, alarms wailing in reverse. Once, in the corridor outside the cryo bay, the walls pulsing like lungs. And once, in the worst of them, he stood before a mirror in his own quarters, watching himself mouth a name that didn't belong to anyone alive or anyone dead. The name wasn't his, but it was carved into his chest in bruises, just under the collarbone. When he finally tore himself from the sheets, gasping for air that felt too cold to be real, there was blood under his fingernails and a message scrawled into the condensation on the viewport. You were on the ship, Daniel. You always were. He ran diagnostics, full neural scans, sanity protocols, AI integrity sweeps. All clear. Everything said he was fine. Everything said there was no anomaly. But when he pulled up the crew manifest again, just to be sure, he found something he couldn't explain. Grant's name was there, yes, but it was embedded in a different layer. Metadata tagged with a string that didn't belong to Earthfleet systems. In a dead dialect. The same one Elise used. That's when Sarah Lorne appeared. She used to be a field psych officer before she went off the grid. Before she was dishonorably discharged for emotional instability and falsifying memory records. She found Daniel in the mess hall, 3 in the morning ship time, seated alone at a table with 3 trays of untouched food. She didn't ask why he looked like he hadn't blinked in hours. She just sat down and said, "You're hearing the echoes too, aren't you?" Her eyes didn't match. One brown, one silver, a military-grade replacement that shimmered when the ship's lighting glitched. Daniel didn't answer right away, mostly because he didn't know which part of her to believe. Her reputation was a mess of whispers, forged audio logs, conversations she insisted were scrubbed by command, a journal filled with coordinates to places that didn't exist anymore. But what chilled him wasn't what she said. It was what she didn't say. She didn't ask about Elise. She didn't ask about the baby. She didn't ask who he was eating with. Instead, she slid a recorder across the table. "Play it," she said, voice low and fraying at the edges. Daniel hit play. Static. More static. Then a voice. His voice. Calm. Authoritative. Recorded. During a fleet debrief that never happened. "Execute on signal. Target Mercy Dawn. Civilian presence confirmed. Orders from highest tier, no survivors." Daniel froze. He had no memory of this, no operational authority to give such a command. He tried to pause the playback, but it kept going. Then came Elise's voice, clear, terrified, whispering something just before the transmission cut. "This isn't the first time. It's just the first time we remember." The silence that followed was unbearable. Sarah leaned in close, breath brushing the side of his face. "I found 8 recordings like that. Different voices, different orders. Always the same ship, always Mercy Dawn. It's a loop, Daniel. Someone's rewriting what we know. We're not recovering memories. We're shedding them." He stared at her, at the tremble in her fingers, at the faint line of scar tissue, behind her ear like someone had once rewired her brain and tried to hide it. "What are you saying?" he finally asked, barely trusting his own voice. She smiled, tired, broken, too empty to be dangerous. "I'm saying we're not victims of a cover-up. We're participants in something older than Earthfleet, older than memory. They're not erasing the truth, they're replacing it. And whatever's underneath, it doesn't want to stay buried anymore." A low chime rang through the ship. System error, a glitch in the core timer. Or so he thought. But when the lights flickered and came back on, Daniel noticed something else. The mess hall was empty again. The 3 trays? Gone. Sarah Lorne? Gone. No signs on the cams, no trace on the ship logs. The recording, missing from his data pad. Only the message on the viewport remained. But now it said something different. "Check your birth record. The date doesn't exist." And Daniel realized he couldn't remember his mother's face. Or ever being a child. Daniel spent the next 19 hours clawing through the deepest layers of Earthfleet archives, bypassing firewalls he hadn't known existed, hunting a thread he couldn't name. With every encrypted file unlocked, every corrupted data string patched, he built a picture, one that made sense for the first time since Mercy Dawn. There it was, black and white mission footage, security briefings, crew manifests unaltered by metadata manipulation. Grant had been real. Sarah had served 3 tours, 2 commendations, 1 court-martial. Even Elise. She had never died. Not officially. Her status had always read classified redeployment. She hadn't lied, Daniel told himself. She hadn't been allowed to tell the truth. It was all here, in these hidden layers, tucked beneath the fabricated surface of a war story that never matched the facts. He leaned back, jaw locked, adrenaline thrumming with purpose. It was real. The glitch, the vanishings, the voices, they were part of something engineered, an experiment, a cover-up, maybe even something off-world. He didn't care what it was anymore. He'd found it. He had proof. Until the file changed. Not disappeared. Changed. Right before his eyes, Elise's photo, her intake image, tagged with her deployment number and clearance badge, shifted by less than a frame. Just enough to twist her smile upward, to tilt her head 2 degrees in the wrong direction. And her eyes. God, her eyes. They weren't looking into the camera anymore. They were looking at him. He froze, tried to scrub the file, refresh. The archive. Nothing responded. The image grew grainier, but the face grew sharper, pixelated and personal, like it knew him, like it had always known. The screen dimmed to black, and a line of text burned itself across the void. False. Resolution accepted. Resume cycle. That's when he remembered Ohio. Summer of '84. He was 6, maybe 7. Visiting his uncle's lake house, watching fireflies drift over the water. There'd been a storm that night, the power out for hours. But he remembered the static, the old Zenith TV turning on by itself. No cable, just a screen of swirling gray and a voice. Not words, a rhythm, like breathing that didn't belong in that room, like something waiting. The next morning, he woke up in the crawl space beneath the stairs, arms covered in mud and rust, with no memory of how he got there. His uncle never spoke about it, just said he'd been sleepwalking. But now that same pulse was humming through the ship's floor beneath his feet, deep in the hull. That same sound was crawling up his spine, whispering in the walls of his mind. He wasn't unlocking anything, he was reactivating it. The datapad chimed. One new file, no sender, audio only, shaky, old, background distortion like it had been recorded through 3 feet of water. A child's voice, young, afraid, whispering. He's waking up again, but he doesn't know who he is yet. Daniel dropped the pad, backed away. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from a deep animal certainty. This wasn't about Mercy Dawn. It never was. That was just the trigger. The signal, like a key turning in a lock, buried inside their memory. Inside his memory. A test to see who would start to remember. He turned to leave. Lights flickered, and there, on the glass of the control room where his reflection should have been, stood a figure in his Earth Fleet uniform, older, hollow-eyed, watching him through the mirror. It looked just like him. But its mouth was moving, and Daniel wasn't speaking. Roll credits. Because now, none of what you've seen can be trusted. Not the war. Not the memories. Not even Daniel. Daniel wasn't alone anymore. But that didn't bring comfort. It brought something worse. Confirmation. The kind that sinks into your bones and makes you wish you'd never gone looking. It started with a message, not sent, but shown, etched in thermal distortion on the hallway glass outside the infirmary. A smear of letters that weren't visible under normal light, only under the flickering emergency backup systems, during scheduled power cycling. We remember too. Stop looking. At first, he thought it was another hallucination, part of the spiral, the slow unraveling of a mind being devoured by its own memories. But then he saw it again. In a dream that wasn't a dream, Sarah was there, except her name tag read something else. D. Miles, a woman he'd never met but recognized in that immediate, terrifying way you recognize a face from the edge of a nightmare you've carried since childhood. They stood on the bridge of a ship that looked like Mercy Dawn, but older, warped, impossible. And behind her, dozens of figures, blurry, wrong, stood silently, watching him. Every time he turned to look at them directly, they vanished. Every time he looked away, he felt them move closer. D. Miles leaned in, whispered into his ear, not words, but a vibration that ran under his skin, setting his teeth on edge. And when he woke up gasping, there was a mark on his arm, 3 concentric circles drawn in ash. He scrubbed it off. It came back, fainter but deeper, like a scar he'd forgotten having. That same day, others started stepping forward, quietly, not with words, with gestures. The engineering lieutenant who tapped his boot 3 times while passing Daniel in the corridor. The comms officer who left an old Earth-era Polaroid in the cafeteria, blurred, yellowed, showing 6 officers standing in front of a ship no one recognized, with Daniel in the center, smiling. Date stamp, April 9th, 1986 SAG. A year before Daniel was born. They were all connected, Not through roles or ranks or history, but through something else. A pattern, a frequency, hidden in shared dreams and mirror reflections that didn't line up and shadows that lingered longer than their sources. They knew. They had been watching him ever since the first breach. Ever since he started remembering. And then came the footage, unlabeled, undated. No source code. Grainy and distorted like a found VHS pulled from a flooded basement. Daniel stared at the feed, heart stuttering, mind trying to reject what he saw. A hospital room, white, sterile, and too still. A boy, no older than 7, strapped to a bed, whispering to the camera, "You were right all along. They kept us here so we couldn't remember where we came from. You're not crazy. They just want you to believe you are." The boy had his eyes. Exactly his eyes. He paused it, played it again, froze it on the timestamp hidden in the corner under an encoded layer. He decrypted it line by line, sweat on his palms, the world tilting sideways. The footage was from 20 years ago. The hospital wasn't on Earthfleet logs. It didn't appear on any star maps. But its file tag had one strange identifier. Alithiage Protocol 7B. External observation. Daniel McCrae, SAR subject Echo 1. He wasn't the subject of the investigation. He was the experiment. And now, the observers were breaking silence. That night someone, or something, bypassed ship-wide security to access the central broadcast array. For 43 seconds, every monitor lit up with the same image. A crude, hand-drawn sketch of a person, split down the middle. Half military uniform, half hospital gown. A message beneath it in simple block font. This isn't the first. Life you've lived. The crew didn't speak of it, but Daniel saw the changes. More and more of them avoiding mirrors, covering old tattoos like they suddenly meant something else. A technician in Maintenance B sealed off a room with no door and claimed there had always been one there. Someone removed all clocks from the lower decks. Nobody objected, and now a third voice, neither Daniel's nor Sarah's nor the boys', has entered the recordings, speaking in strange half-sentences during system startup, broadcast in frequencies just above hearing. You can't hear it, but you can feel it. It ends like this. Daniel turns to the camera in the observation bay, the one you've been watching through. His eyes are empty now, but he smiles, and in his voice, not quite his own, he says, "You've been with me this whole time, haven't you?" The screen flickers, static, then a frame freezes, one you weren't supposed to catch. Your room, your reflection, but someone else is standing behind you, watching. The silence inside Daniel wasn't quiet. It throbbed like a wound that had never healed, a cavity carved out by memory or the absence of it. The ship no longer felt like a place, but a thought he was trapped inside. Hallways looped. Doors didn't lead where they should. Faces shifted slightly each time he blinked, like reality was being painted and repainted in real time. Yet it was not the distortions that undid him. It was the clarity. The sudden stillness, when everything made a kind of emotional sense that no data file ever could. Not when he discovered the old med bay below Deck 9. Not when he found the wall scratched with dozens of names, many of which matched his own handwriting. Daniel McCrae, DM, Echo 1, Echo 3, Echo 7. And not when he found the file left for him in a box no larger than a palm. An audio clip so simple, so human, it should have meant nothing. It was his mother's voice, not the abstract idea of her. The real her, humming an old Earth lullaby. One he'd forgotten, but his body hadn't. The moment it played, he collapsed to his knees, choking on a grief he hadn't known he carried. The sound of her voice was like a key turning. And then, the memories rushed in. He remembered. Not everything. Just enough to hurt. The hospital wasn't a metaphor. It was where he was raised. Grown. He hadn't been born in the way he thought. He had been designed. He had been part of something greater, something called Aletheia, a program to create, Minds capable of absorbing impossible trauma, of rewriting history internally to protect the collective narrative. But something failed, or something worked too well, because he began to dream of lives that weren't his, and found that they were. He was the echo of every Daniel before him, built to carry the burden of a truth no one else could survive, and now he stood before a choice. The observers had made contact fully, not as ghosts or phantoms, but as versions of himself, scattered across timelines, experiments, memories stitched from fear and pain. They begged him not to break the loop. They warned him, "If you remember everything, you cease to be human. You become the system itself. You become the one watching." But what is humanity, if not the ability to choose the unbearable over the convenient lie? Daniel walked into the control chamber, where the final sequence awaited, a neural merge that would allow him to see every version of himself, every failed cycle, every ghost that whispered to him in reflections. Sarah appeared again, flickering, broken, real. She looked at him with tears in her eyes, not digital, not programmed, just grief. "If you do this," she said, "you'll lose who you think you are. But maybe that's the only way to remember who we were supposed to be." He placed his hand on the console, and he hesitated, not out of fear, but love. A love for a woman he barely remembered, for a child who might never have existed, for the possibility that even engineered memories could hold truth. And in that moment he asked, not with words, but with soul, "What does it mean to be real, if our pain is artificial but our sorrow is true?" The console activated. Everything dissolved. No, not dissolved, opened, and the voice returned, this time his own. But older, wiser, terrified. "You were never meant to survive this long." Then silence, the screen fades to black. A single breath lingers, and then, "Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for stories you were never meant to hear. Until next time, remember, some truths don't want to be found."